And here we are. So we're live. Joost Kerhofs, my guest today. Welcome, Joost.
Thank you, Mike.
We're here for an exciting topic. Our topic today is organizational behavior management, and that sounds pretty awesome. And I'm really curious to learn from you. But maybe first of all, Joost, maybe you introduce yourself a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. My name's Joost, and I am Dutch. Live near Utrecht in the center of the Netherlands. And my background is organizational science, and I've worked as consultant, project manager, director for lots of years already. But in the last decade or so, since 2009, I've come into contact with a very interesting part of science called OBM, and that stands for Organizational Behavior Management. I was very glad that I got to learn about it, and I was also frustrated that I didn't encounter it earlier. But I've made a living out of it, and also a mission to tell others about OBM as a scientifically proven method of bringing out the best in people. So it's about organizational performances that we look at. So I have my own company where I help clients develop better performances, not just by looking at the results that they want, but also how to get to the results by intervening on the behavior part. And that's where this nice piece of science of OBM comes into play, because here's a method that is extensively tested already for decades in North America, and as always, it takes a while to get across the Atlantic and and found itself here. But I'm glad I encountered it, and I'm embracing it to help others bring out the best in their own people. So what I do is I teach others how to do that within their own companies. So yeah.
Awesome. So a little bit of housekeeping for those who are watching. There is the invitation. First of all, if you have any questions, please just put them into the chat or into the comments, and we'll be looking forward to answer them, or most of them, because we'll have some limited time, as good as it gets. So that's the first invitation. Now let's start. And I think to start into the topic, there are two things that are probably bringing us together today. Obviously, most organizations, leaders, we talk also a little bit about leadership here, are, let's say, challenged to make a lot of change happen in the upcoming years. So God knows what all has to change in organizations, but it will be probably a lot. We're seeing it already in some organizations, and markets change. It's all in movement. And at the same time, from the past, we've been into these games, and we know, well, initiatives we've run, large initiatives, showed average results.
Mm-hmm.
And last but not least, as you just pointed out, you're an expert on change, and I'd say change from a behavioral standpoint, which is obviously way more interesting. So probably the most important aspect of change. That's my bias here. So my first question to enter the topic would be, there are these change initiatives, high dreams, low results, or let's say average results, we never know. But what do you think from traditional approaches? What is actually missing? Why do things not sustain?
That's an interesting question. The sustainability topic is quite hot because, well, as it turns out, you can bring about change and people succeed in it. But what we also see is that once the external consultants leave and management changes their priorities and think of the next flavor of the month and that kind of stuff, then what you see is that it all goes down again. So the performance was increased, goal was reached, perhaps with some muscle even, but once you're there, it doesn't stop, because before something is a habit, it takes a certain process in the brain. And it's this habit that is not yet exactly formed in this intervention phase. The groundwork is there. That's great, but how to really follow up on that? That's where OBM can be of use as a science and as a practical approach. So we see a lot of these research initiatives concerning the success rates of changes, and whether it's McKinsey or Gartner or Capgemini doing the research, it turns out that about 30% is called a success of the changes. Well, that really depends on your definition of success, obviously. But what interests me more is that when you look at the reasons of not being successful, to not call it a failure, but
Right.
not getting there, then when you ask around, a lot of these companies say, well, it's the behavior part. So the behavior is always in the top 3 reasons why the change fails. And that interests me. And I think that OBM as a science can really contribute more to the success. If you really know more about the laws, as you can call them, the laws of behavior, of human behavior, if you take those into account and embed those in your change and your interventions, then the chances of success are getting higher. So if you apply it well, then you get more sustainable change. But then you have to know about behavior, and that's where OBM comes in as a
Right.
practical science.
Right. And that's the interesting thing, especially because we put even the term organizational behind it, right? It's not only individual behavior, and I think everybody is pretty, individually aware of, hey, January 1st hits in a few weeks, and of course we'll have
That's always an interesting
exactly. Who will
So,
not be up for better food, more exercise?
I want to drink more.
Oh, you want to drink more? Okay, that should be easy to manage. It depends. Right? If you never drink alcohol, it's the question. If you drink,
I'm not saying alcohol, but
right.
That's what people think.
But this is already a challenging thing, because everybody knows, right? We set our expectations, our targets on day 1, and then we might think about day 2. Well, it's only day 2, and here we go. And now comes even the organizational.
It's slipping already on day 2.
So maybe we can. Sorry.
Because of the habit factor. If you want to change your behavior and your habits, you have to work on new habits, and that takes effort. It's not only about the exercising, but also in how to really put yourself in a position to increase the probability of you displaying this new behavior. So as for the exercise example, I know of people who really chop it into small bits, and and even as I advise them, it's all about getting into the behavior of changing your clothes at first. You have to pick a time and put on your jogging trousers and your training suit. Right. So sometimes it's just a starting point just to do that and not exercise, but take that small step first and get familiar with the habit of changing into that sports clothing ritual.
Right.
So,
yeah,
go ahead.
I think that it's a good example, although I still want to bring it a little bit back into the organizational context, and sure, probably we can swap forth and back. Like saying, okay, we talked about behavior change. Most of the changes needs behavior change. And at the same time, this leads us to habits, because we're now used to work in a specific way, and a totally different way would be a totally different, different behavior needed. And that would be a total different habit. Yeah. How would we approach that how would you approach that in a organizational context, where we say, yeah, we need to change here how we work together? Yeah, the first topic is to be very specific about what you want, and that's where it all goes wrong immediately with a lot of companies, that they think they are talking about behavior while in fact they are not. So if you want to change behavior, you have to be very specific on what that actually means to a person when he or she does it. So there I encounter a lot of clients and talk to directors, and they say, well, I want my people to show more ownership. So I want them to take ownership. And I think I say, that's great, but can you show me how to do that? So what do I do if I come to work for you and you want me to show ownership? Yeah. How does that work? What behavior, what actually an active movement of my body or my lips, speech, that's also behavior, verbal behavior, but my body needs to do something active, and that's a good starting point. If you can define those things in terms of, I can catch you in the act doing it, then we're probably more likely to talk about behavior than those abstract concepts that people in the boardroom are talking about. Because let's face it, if you want a client-friendly culture where client comes first, in terms of what people do in their role, in their job, differs immensely. And when you're on a call center, when you're an operative, it means a total different set of behaviors than when you're on a reach truck in a warehouse. But both people can influence how the client perceives your company. So the first order of business is to talk about performances. What do we need to achieve? What results are we focusing on, and what results are needed, and how to get those results? What is the actual ethical, legal, and safe behavior to get there? So that's a major step. Also in the thinking of my clients, what do we need to do when we want our culture to change? Well, think of ways of defining and pinpointing the behaviors that you need to see to get the results that you want. Right.
And why is that important? You may ask, or the
Yeah.
audience may
Yeah.
ask it.
Yeah.
Well, it has to do with how behavior and habits are formed. What we have learned is that behavior is a function of a lot of things,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the environment is indeed something that has great effect on behaviors. If you do something and the environment does not allow you to do it again, punishes you, suppresses that, then the likelihood of you doing it again may decrease. But on the other hand, if you really make the environment one that really is helpful in supporting that behavior by positively reinforcing that behavior, not necessarily by rewards, but that's what everybody thinks immediately of in terms of how can we reward the behavior. No, what we're talking about is a broader term, and that's called reinforcements. And I hope that we can talk about positive reinforcement, because that's the factor that is the one that most likely increases the probabilities of behavior showing up again and reappearing, and people doing the same stuff over and over again. The fact that we do the things we do is because somehow it has been reinforced in the past. That's a very basic law from psychology and from behavioral science. We do what we do because of what happens to us when we do it.
Right.
And it's the environment that actually tells us, not only through people, but also through objects, that what we do makes sense and is worthwhile to be displayed again.
Right. This is Felix. Thank you for your for this formal language. I'm just seeing it. Let me just check one thing. See? Okay. I just put you on mute temporarily, Joost, because there is a feedback loop. But I'll stop talking, turn it on again. But what Dilek is here pointing to, Kurt Levine's formula, right? To say it's not the people, it's not better people, worse people, good people. They behave because of a complex, let's say, set of factors, how they are interdependent, and which turned them into a certain direction. And then what you said, Joost, it formed let's say it formed a habit, a set of habits. And now the question was, you went to this leader and you started talking about these habits, why the old ones are here potentially, and what they instead want to see. Now the big question that comes into play is, and that's what I want to drag further a little bit, again from the perspective of OBM. You cannot change people. So what are you doing then to influence? What is the approach of OBM to move further from what we're knowing now?
Yeah, well, I guess it's about setting the right environment for people to perform in. And if they do something you want and they get something out of it that they want themselves, then they are more likely to do it again. So the trick is to create the dopamine effect, because this neurotransmitter dopamine is what really makes us to want to do stuff again. It's the do it again hormone, as it's also called. And this is a consequence of behavior. So if you do something, if I press a button, something happens, and if the outcome is something I like or I want, then I get positively reinforced that pressing this button will get me something I want. And the likelihood of me repeating that is actually increased. But this is, of course, a very small example, but it's It's how our brain works. So what we are looking for in OBM is to create an environment where it is where the barriers to start are very low, where the support is high, and where the consequences are positive. But that's not how it usually works in changes. Changes are, in fact, in a lot of instances, they are imposed on us. And what that does to a person is that you are in the habit of doing your job the way you were doing it, or have been doing it for 10 or maybe 20 years. And then somebody says, well, this research has shown, and this consultant is telling me that if we do it the other way around or do it differently, then the company makes more money. But what does that mean to the person? The person is coming into a conflict in the actual energy that is needed to perform the behavior. Let me give you an example, or even a small exercise even. So maybe you are familiar with it already, I don't know, but I use it a lot, and it's me talking to the audience as their leader, and I say, I want change, and I ask a small sacrifice in your behavior, and my company will benefit from it. And the change is really simple, and I ask people to fold their arms like they are used to. And then I say, okay, this is not the way we want to do it anymore. So please do it the other way around. From now on, we will only get the result and the good performance if you change your behavior, and not just once, but into this new habit of you doing it exactly the other way around. What does that mean to a brain? It means that you struggle. You are used to doing it the one way. Someone is imposing something, maybe even threatening with negative consequences if you don't. We'll go bankrupt, and you'll lose your job, and I don't know. But the brain itself is struggling, and it doesn't like it, because our brain is really, well, I'd like to call it conservative in how it spends its energy. And it all is evolutionary, because, well, when we were still on the plains or on the savannah, you better be careful on how you spend your energy, because you're not likely to have food always. So we are conservative in spending our energy and leaving a lot to be used in real life-threatening situations, preferably. So we have this reserve. So here you have this initiative where we are asking people to behave agile, whatever that is. I'm not an agile expert, but I know that the way things are approached and done, it's other processes, and you have these stand-ups, but it's doing stuff in another way than you're used to. And while you are trying to do that, your brain is thinking, why am I doing it this way? It's confusing, it's hard, it's new, I'm not getting used to it fast enough to reach the goal that is still there. Because, hey, let's face it, the sales targets are still the same or even higher, and people still have to perform, but now they have to behave in a different way. Well, if you take into account that even the way we fold our arms and the other way around is difficult. Well, let's talk about changing a total system of working, and let's work agile from now on. It's a lot to ask of people and their brains. So what this means is that if you want this change and there are only negative consequences for people, then you get resistance. You have to think of ways of making it attractive to try the new stuff. And if you take small steps, that there are really positive consequences to get. So that's what OBM is for, and how it focuses on creating that new environment where it's becoming more likely that the new behaviors occur because of the positive consequences.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's already a good introduction. Edita has a question, so I'm bringing it in here because we're still talking about the nature of OBM before we probably grab a few more details.
Very nice. That's a very good question, and there is a very strong relationship because OBM is actually the use of ABA in organizational settings. Where does OBM come from? Originally, it's from ABA, and one of the founders of OBM is actually a clinical psychologist called Aubrey Daniels, and he was educated in ABA and had been using it in institutes, helping mentally ill to perform in other ways that they can function better in the context of the world they are living in. And he thought, well, why wouldn't this work on healthy people, mentally sane people? If this works on behavior in getting people on the streets again because they have agoraphobia. He cured a person being treated for agoraphobia for 26 years with electroshock therapy. And we're talking about 60 years ago already. Mind you, when Aubrey Daniels was doing his work as a clinical psychologist, he was in this time where, it was either medication or electroshock therapy. And then ABA came into play, and he was able to treat people in 6 weeks. And they were out and about and being cheerful and not anxious anymore. And he thought, well, this is interesting. Would that work in companies as well? and he got the opportunity actually from a few befriended entrepreneurs. And it turned out it's generic. So that's when OBM started out, I guess, in the late 60s, early 70s. But for some reason, it's remained in North America for a long time. One of the best kept secrets in management science. It's almost as if they wanted it not to leave the borders to get ahead of us. But finally, we've also learned about OBM here in Europe, and So good question, and there is a definite link.
No, let's get back to the. Just check out the volume again. I'm just putting you briefly on mute and balance this out, because the next question for me would be to become a little bit more concrete. When you just, we talked about this executive or managers about the change ahead, and now we've got this understanding, it's not only about doing things, it's about this understanding what it does to people or what it doesn't do to people. And there needs to be a little bit of a more understanding of what you just said. What's in it for me? Like, how do I pay off my energy invested into what I gain from a change. How would an organization then approach the next steps? What would be the tools or interventions OBM would give them to look deeper? Which is turning on again.
Yeah, okay. That's a fair question. So we've been talking about the behavioral science part, more or less, and we also need let's say, the business administration part. So how do we actually use this knowledge to bring about change? Well, there is a protocol. It's been under development in the last few decades, tried and tested, and it's this protocol that we use to get the interventions we need. So, what does it look like? It's 7 steps. The first one we already talked about. It's to be very specific about what you want. And then to implement a way of measuring how well it's going already. So if you know what you want, if you want, let's say, safety, you want a safe culture. I mean, and I take this example because I'm in the middle of it, in a global implementation with one of my multinational clients.
Okay.
They want to achieve a better safety culture. Well, what does that mean? It means a lot, and so it means taking care of a lot of definitions first on what you want to see, and then to measure how well that's going. So what we learn our clients is how to measure behavior, and when we know what the baseline is, then we can see, okay, how much does that differ from where you want to be? So where are we now, and where do you want to be? And this gap can be analyzed with a behavioral analysis tool called the ABC analysis. And this is really a tool that finds out what the real reasons are for showing the unwanted behavior. So why people aren't doing the stuff that you want them, but also why are some people already doing it, if the baseline at least is not 0, which is luckily often the case. So why are only 30 out of 100 people putting on their safety goggles when they enter a room with assets, where assets are stored? You have to put on the goggles before you enter the room, but only 3 out of 10 or 30 out of 100 do that. Why is that? So that's where the analysis tool for the root cause analysis of the behavior comes in. And once we know about those root causes, then we go into the intervention phase, and it's 3 steps combined. So it's an iterative combination of 3 steps that are used to increase the performance, and it's a combination of performance feedback, not just feedback saying, "Oh, you're going the right way and great job," but no, it's performance feedback on how well is the actual behavior performed, or the result achieved. Combined with goal setting theory and positive reinforcement. So we gradually increase the wanted behavior by increasing the opportunities for getting positive consequences. And of course, the 7th step is to evaluate this in the meantime, and adjust and conclude in the end on how well you performed. So Yeah, it's a protocol, and it's been in use for quite a while, and has been tested in a lot of circumstances. And yeah, we're quite happy using it, and seeing great results and achievements. And that's how we do it.
It's interesting when I listen to you and when I look at this protocol, 7 steps you said, right? It's a 7-step protocol, and you've got this whole understanding. The why is in there. There is this sort of, and what do we currently have, where we currently are, what the gap is, and then, dive deeper and then come towards it's a cyclic approach, right? It's obviously
Yeah,
a never-ending cycle.
cyclic with iteration.
It reminds me on so many popular approaches out there. I mean, first of all, the old
Yeah,
one, action learning, right? Action learning has been there
right.
probably 100 years ago, I think more than 100 years ago. Nowadays, we call it, I don't know, there's lean change or similar things. But what is interesting, I was just thinking about, not sure if you're confronted with these things sometimes, OKRs, this
Hmm.
famous objectives and key results.
Yeah.
Most organizations are taking this because they figured out the traditional goal setting mechanisms don't work. At
Hmm.
least
Hmm.
not, they don't fulfill what is actually meant, because now we talk not about output, we talk about outcome. And
Hmm.
this reminds me immediately also about what do we need for this outcome to happen in terms of behavior, right? And how could we measure it? And how often could we look into it and learn? Is there a combination? Do you experience that in the field?
There are a lot of combinations possible because
Right.
OBM is so generic as a science. It can be
Right.
linked to a lot of methods. Uh,
Awesome.
so we've seen a great integration with lean. We're
Yeah.
seeing promising things with DevOps and agile, but
Yeah.
also in other terms, also leadership development.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, how do you develop a leader?
Yeah.
It's all about thinking about what does a leader really do? What does he need to do to be successful? And it's all about defining the real specific behaviors and how to really cultivate those behaviors. Maybe you have a person that has shown a promising start, but how do you cultivate it in
Right.
terms of positive reinforcement of the wanted behaviors?
Right.
There is a question. Is it?
Yeah, what Dilek brought up here as a question just reminded me as a fit to what you were just talking about. Maybe is it, like says, is deliberately creating a development environment for behavior change. I'm not 100% sure what is meant here, but I could imagine it's more of a collaborative organizational place where we're able to learn, we're able to move to a different way of understanding, for example, what leadership means here, and how we make it possible for groups of leaders, groups of people to, get into this direction. I'm not sure if that was meant here.
No, I'm not sure either. But as we talk about it, yeah, it comes to mind that it's really a group thing here. So OBM is about interacting with the people that you want to show the actual performance. It's not by just giving directions and imposing targets and stuff. No, you really have to dive into the thing and talk with the people who you want the performance to be delivered from. So if you're a sales manager, you can use OBM to get more sales, but you need to think of, okay, what do my sales reps actually need to do? And this is a famous example from one of our trainees who was working in this field.
Mm, mm,
She told me, well, the thing was, I had this team, and they were making promising quotes to clients, interesting proposals, but they were not calling to get the answer they wanted, not making the actual call in hearing, hey, do you want to do business? And so a lot of work goes into making the proposals and sending it before the deadline, and then nothing. So one of the actual behaviors that we're looking for in sales reps is making that call and asking, and not just making the call and talk about this and that, but actually showing the verbal behavior of posing the question, hey, are we going to do business, yes or no? But for some reason, it's a question that's not asked very much. So when you use OBM, you can actually increase the frequency and the volume of people asking that question, with resulting higher turnover and revenues.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the actual results.
So, Dilek, I'm not sure if we somehow addressed your question. Please feel free to add some more additional details if you want to know more. In the meanwhile, changing behavior towards a goal is one thing, but in most organizations, goals very often are also set up in a way that they obviously, as you already pointed it out, are increasing or generating the behavior we don't want to see because, for example, we are evaluating people individually, right? We want to have more teamwork. We want to have certain outcomes, but people are doing it, what they're doing, because they're paid by doing, something completely locally, something individually. Does that mean when you go into OBM, you also mentioned goal setting, right? You have to, let's say, research, investigate the whole goal setting structure as it is to see, hey, what is paying into, what is not paying into what you want to see more of.
Yeah, that's true. It's goal setting at a different level, but yeah, it's definitely a good way to go. So it's all about changing the environment, and a company goal is part of that environment, because once it's there are people working towards it, or people are working away from it, and so it's all part of the environment. And we want to optimize how the environment will work on your brain to really increase the probability, because we can't talk about certainty here, because human behavior is it's a probabilistic model.
Yeah, gratefully, right? Otherwise, we would be machines. So that's part of our nature.
You can only do so much. So as a person, you are trying to influence other people's behaviors, but you cannot really get into their brains and finding out all the reasons why people are doing certain things or not. They always make their own decisions based on the consequences it has for them. So you can think in terms of what it will benefit you or your company if a person does something, but why would a person do that if he doesn't benefit him or herself? So if it is in contrast or in conflict even with other needs or priorities, people still make decisions that fit their own purpose and their own goals. And I always use the example of the person that you would really want to show the extra mile by working a little late after 5 o'clock. So you can do what you like and positively reinforce that behavior. But if that person has an old mother that needs help, and you can only provide that help when you're home on time, and you have to leave at 5. Then it's you against a person helping his or her mother. So yeah, you can reward what you want and reinforce what you want, but this person may think it's
Mm.
not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to help my mother. So it's all about the consequences in the minds of the people you are trying to influence, but you can only do so much. So that's why we approach it as a probabilistic model.
Right. So, Joost, one question. Now, we started actually with leaders, and obviously leaders don't need to be only the, let's say, the hierarchical leaders, because
Mhm.
probably
Oh,
everybody who
an
starts,
informal leader as well. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, exactly. It's this sort of, hey, somebody takes now action, stands up, and basically starts influencing for the positive goal or whatever it is. If we think about this transformation from traditional to, we're using OBM now and using this science, management science, how can we imagine, what would this person learn? I mean, it's also this sort of learning to show up differently, to use different interventions. I mean, they're new to this material, right? How can we imagine this happening on a day-to-day basis? Because again, we're talking about making it stick, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't want to have the same thing happening. The OBM consultant leaves and it falls
Exactly.
back.
Yeah.
They're not yet there. What do they learn? How can they get there in this sort of
And
practice?
so you're talking about the what the training looks like, or
Well, it might be, but first of all, I'm talking about learning. How do I grow my capability of applying this, right? Training might be one part,
Mhm.
but probably it's more. It's more.
It's all about consequences. So our approach is that we put you in a position where you can see what happens if you change your environment and experience consequences from it. So learning to apply OBM is also about getting it into action and see what happens. So action learning, what you were referring to, is actually quite nice reference. It's all about doing stuff, trying it, and seeing what happens. And if you like what you see, then it's a positive consequence, and well, you're more likely to do it again.
Right,
So
right.
we want people to learn this by actually applying it. And of course, there's theory to be learned, and yeah, we we take care of it. But the real learning on the application of OBM is yeah, really doing it in practice and getting good coaching. So that's what I do a lot.
Mm,
I
mm.
learn people how to use it themselves. So my target groups, my clients are mostly leaders, managers, senior executives, and I learn them the ropes and I coach them on how to apply it in their own company.
Yeah. I'm just putting here, there's a couple of courses out there people can take, and here's some of them. They're even certified. I'm not talking about this now in detail, but APMG is one of the bodies of, providing
Yeah.
good quality training, and OBM is something you can get trained on and learn
Yeah.
what the material is all about. So for anyone who wants to go there, please just visit the website. Um, Another question regarding the analysis part, because it's quite interesting. You were talking, there's certainly a bunch of tools you're using to assess, right? This, where are we now, but and where is the gap? How can we think about this? Is this tools which are more or less like, qualitative, where people look at, whiteboards together? Or is it a combination of qualitative and quantitative, like surveys? And how can we imagine this first phase where people look into where we are?
Well, if you're talking about the analysis of the
Mm,
actual performance
yeah,
taking place and the reasons behind it,
yeah.
then there are tools, but it's not a whole toolbox. It's really quite small set of things that we do and use. But the main thing is that we try to figure out what the reasons are for starting to act. So what comes before the behavior? It's what we call antecedents with a technical term, but you can forget about that. It's all you can intervene on behavior before it starts. And goals are an example of that, but also procedures and rules and processes, and so those are communicated and trained, and then you expect people to behave. But you can also look at what happens to people when they actually do it. That's where the consequence analysis comes into play. And we use several different setups depending on how big the audience is or how large the group of performers is that you want to influence. But think about group sessions or interviews with people and trying to figure out the root cause of their behavior by simply looking at what they mention as consequences of what happens to them when they do it. The consequences are negative, immediate, and certain. And well, then you're very likely to see behavior drop. While as the consequences may be positive and immediate and certain or uncertain, then you get a whole different curve. And so you can use the analysis tool with those different dimensions and work with the power of those combinations. Because when you look at the dopamine effect as an example, you need immediate and certain positive consequences. So that's why bonuses don't quite do it,
right?
Because they are future uncertain, and our brain just turns off. It's all about the near future, and how near? Well, hold on to your seats. It's just 1 minute, preferably even less. So our brain is all about short term. What do I get from it when I do it now? What will I gain from it directly? Versus, well, what might happen if I do it in a negative or positive way. So it's how do you say? It's sometimes the other side of the medal. I'm not sure if that's a correct
sure
metaphor. So you have two sides, the positive and the negative side, but sometimes the consequences are actually mirrored. When it's a positive consequence for unwanted behavior, then it's unwanted behavior from your perspective as an influencer. Hey, why doesn't this person do what I want? That's unwanted. Well, you can count on it that the simple fact that the person is showing this behavior is because that there are positive consequences to the behavior, to the performer. So it's not that you think, well, it's unwanted, it's a negative consequence for me. No, you have to look at the reasons why people are doing it, and then you find out that there are positive consequences to unwanted behavior. Well, it's unwanted from your perspective, but the fact that the person is doing stuff is because this behavior is positive in the outcome. So that's what we play with, what we use in this analysis part of the deal.
Right.
But it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing that that Edita brought up before, and it's probably what we touched already a little bit about. It's it's probably a process to get into this kind of thinking, talking, and then obviously practicing. Um, Maybe we could add here to say what is a typical time span, a group of people, and let's talk about a few teams and maybe the leadership team even gets into that apart from the first analysis into really ingraining it into their daily thinking or acting. Is there anything
It
from your experience, right? It's not about
from my
science.
experience, well, and I've trained a lot of people already, like hundreds, and I think if you take about 6 months, then you can do at least once. You can do the whole program with all the steps from the protocol and see what happens. That's a good first learning experience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you apply it properly, right? So it's all in the word properly here.
Exactly, is the question.
So if you take if you take a regular practitioner course in OBM, that usually takes about 6 months, and then it's a bit of theory, but a lot of practice, bringing it to the work area, and it will definitely give you an idea of what it might look like if you do it again, and if you really ingrain this in your way of working, because OBM is not a trick. It's not a mindset. It's a habit in itself. So applying OBM is just as a habit as it is with all those different things that you want to change with OBM.
Just adding here for people who want to read more about it, there is tons of, you don't need to jump on a course immediately and say, hey, okay, I need to invest a couple
No, there's a bunch of articles,
right? There's a book you wrote. It's in sort of an intro book, so that all points people to your website, and there is many more things let me see, there is more stuff. There's a white paper, so also a short abbreviation of looking into, and of course pointing people to your website where there is the whole offering and where they find more about you. If somebody's coming from LinkedIn, they have your contact too. Now, a final question I have, because we're coming to the end of the hour and the end of our session. What are let's say again from your experience, what are those people, probably leaders, who brought you in a certain manner from a certain stance where the way they approached this was pointing to more, let's say, higher probability for success because they looked deeper into things, they had a deeper awareness? I mean, even bringing you already on board seems like having an awareness, because otherwise I would go to McKinsey, right, and say, we need to change.
That's true.
Or bring in an actual consultant.
It often I get in contact with companies when they find out that just giving another presentation about the change that they want to happen is not enough. They find out that having a procedure or having people trained, or it's all those things that we talked about that are in the time frame are before the actual behavior, and we try to get people to do stuff like to instigate the behavior. But as it turns out, and science is really clear about this, it's the consequences that are more likely to influence the behavior than all the stuff that we put in front of it. So yes, of course we need a goal, and it's nice to have a why, but that doesn't really change our habits. It's the consequences that do it. And once people learn that, that they have all the antecedents, as we call them, in place, and there are structures and there are procedures, and people are still not doing it, it's actually a motivational issue. And that's where I come into play. Well, at least for my clients and my colleagues, my OBM professionals, colleagues, that of course they do it as well.
Wow.
So
so that sounds like a very interesting thing and concept, and as you say, science to look into, probably for most organizations, but probably organizations or people or leaders need to be ready to face the mirror, right? It's like saying, hey, we're talking about people here, right?
I bring a mirror. Yeah, that's true.
And it's not only the structures, it's not quick fixes. There is something to talk about here, which is about us, how we work as human beings, individually, but specifically also as social animals, as I sometimes call it, but groups, right?
Yeah.
And so, all right, it was a real pleasure talking to you, and really interesting, Joost. And again, we pointed all the interesting information in here, where people can find out more. Let's see, I'd be really curious to learn more next year, because it's the end of the year. It's this typical thing. As we said, 1st of January, we have a couple of plans, what to change in the first few days. But you probably know how to do that better, and probably I'll call you, because I want to become, of course, more healthy in terms of eating and, doing sports and everything.
Let's talk about the consequences of you showing those behaviors.
Yeah, exactly. For now, I wish you a great time ahead, a nice, and quiet time, Joost. And looking forward to new things.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.